going to share my slide. Good morning, everyone. It is a real joy to be with everyone this morning. I'm Dina Jensen. I'm the director of the Center for Nonprofit Leadership here at California Lutheran University. And today we're really grateful to welcome our colleagues and friends to really bring to life the Nonprofit Workplace Report that was conducted in Southern California. So just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording today's session. We're going to ask as you get settled if you have any specific expectations for today's session or would like to pose any questions in the chat box, you're welcome to do so. We're going to have kind of two parts of today's presentation. We're going to be welcoming Matt Kamen and Jen Lobenhofer, our friends and colleagues from Envision Consulting, to walk us through highlights of this impressive body of research that was conducted the last, my goodness, for about 6-8 months, assessing equitable workplace practices in the nonprofit sector, as well as a compensation analysis of positions that will be made available probably later this summer. So this is really a sneak peek, and we're really grateful to have the opportunity to bring the body of research to life. And what we thought would be very helpful for all of us in the nonprofit sector is rather than focus just on what the research tells us in a set of recommendations, but to actually really bring to life by inviting Larry and Norb and their client Sandy from the Peterson Automotive Museum to kind of walk through what this looks like inside of nonprofit organizations. And so we're going to take a little pivot break in the middle of today's session and then have a case study that really walks through what it looks like to kind of chew on some of these issues. We're delighted to have you here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to, let's see here. Go. And I'm going to do a proper introduction to my colleagues as they get their slides set up. So Envision Consulting has been a very close friend and a very frequent referral of ours for strategy work, executive search, as well as other nonprofit capacity building. I'd like to just say thank you very much for the generosity of the firm supporting the work of the Center for Nonprofit Leadership as volunteers, as facilitators of our workshops, and very generous financial donors. I'm really happy to introduce, for those of you who have not had a chance to meet Matt Kamen, who is the co-founder and managing partner of Envision Consulting. I'll be spotlighting he and Jennifer in just a quick moment, but extensive experience in the nonprofit space in multitude of roles, has founded organizations as well as served as a consultant. He really specializes in populations ranging from disabled adults, domestic violence, children in non-public schools, and the geriatric community. And he has also sat on numerous boards located in the US and abroad. So welcome, Matt. And then Jen Lobenhofer is one of our famous volunteers at the Center for Nonprofit Leadership, has been doing strategy work with us for going on a couple decades now. But she's also has a full-time job as the director of strategy services at Envision. So she's a social impact consultant and really helps organizations fulfill their mission. Many of us have worked with Jen in a multitude of capacities, and also I think, Jen, thank you, because I think a lot of your work with Suzanne Elliott really helped nonprofit organizations navigate the early days of the pandemic here along the Central Coast. So a debt of gratitude. So she also served as faculty here at Cal Lutheran. We like to claim that. and specializes in economic development organizations. So we're really delighted to have you both. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Just a little bit of context setting. I haven't had a conversation in a long while that didn't have some tie back to the difficulty around talent management and making meaning of the Great Reshuffle, and what is happening in the labor market, and how do we make sure that great people are coming and staying and are cared for and nurtured in our nonprofit sector. And given that we're all in the people business, I think this is such an incredibly important topic to kind of make meaning around. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, by the way. You're amazing. I don't know if everybody knows, but you're really spectacular. I don't know how you do any of the stuff that you do, so thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being such a strong partner as well, and for the introduction. I hate being spotlighted. It's fine, I know you have to be, but I can't see anybody. So if you guys, I'm not the biggest fan of talking at rooms, especially when I'm on Zoom. I can't see anybody. So like, if you guys wouldn't mind just really do chatting in there, I love to take questions. I also like to see faces, but I know we have a slideshow and I know some of you, so it's nice to see some of you again. And just really quickly, so about who Envision is, we've been around about 11 years. I come from nonprofit through and through. I have my MBA in nonprofit management and ran a homeless shelter on the East Coast, and then a foster youth shelter in Hollywood, and then started this company with my business partner, Allison, 11 years ago. And here we are. It's crazy to me. When it comes to the Great Shuffle, by the way, as Dina was saying, we've also, I think over the last 3 months, lost about 5 staff. And most of them on Jen's side in strategy. So when we're having this conversation about keeping people and hiring people and why people stay, just know that it affects all of us, consultants as well. So we are about 60 to 70% search. We've got 2 different kinds of recruiting lines. I'm happy to talk about that later. I'm not here to sell today. And then 30 to 40% strategy. And a big part of what we're doing right now is mergers and acquisitions. And usually when you see things like recession and all those wonderful things out there in the news, a lot more mergers are happening. So just something to know about who we are. I also just really quickly want to say thank you to our sponsors. For this report, we've had some really spectacular people step up to help sponsor. And by the way, what I love about it is I get to fundraise, because I got to fundraise to go get that money, which was great. And I think some of you were on the call, but we've got insurance people, we have CPO folks, we have IT people. You can see all of our sponsors on our website, but really, truly, this was a very heavy lift. And so I want to thank everybody who partnered with us. And so compensation is one thing. We all know the compensation report. The Center for Nonprofit Management does it every year. It's fantastic and wonderful. And it's really helpful when we're thinking about hiring people and also when we're thinking about taking jobs. But we're in the business of placing people. We're also in the business of making sure that they stay and that they're happy. And it's not just compensation, right? It's also why people stay, why people leave. What's going on with DEI? Have we actually made an impact in DEI? Are we doing what we said we wanted to be doing? And also, how people make decisions, right? How they feel in their jobs. Can they bring their authentic selves to work? That's really important. That's why we did this report. So it is both a compensation study, and so you will see the same general reports that you always have and when it comes to compensation, but there's so much more to it, which we'll give you a sneak peek in today. But that's really important. I can tell you on every single job that we have posted how much people want to make, right? And I can also tell you how much they will get the job for. But again, it's that why. It's what keeps people in their role. That's so important, because as nonprofits, we can't afford to continuously replace people. People leave, we have to spend the money, get them in, train them. So we also want to make sure that they're happy. And that's a really important part, and that's why we did this. So that's about us. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? Nope. Okay, I don't want you guys to be quiet today, by the way, because again, I can talk I've had 3 cups of coffee, but it would be nice to have some questions if you have them. Okay, So how we did this, we did 2 open surveys, right, from October to January. And so I want to be clear that the data from this report is from October to January. And of course, compensation changes every day, no matter what. But what we had was 115 organizations reply, and then we had 415 individuals reply. And we'll put some of the questions that it's a very, oh, sorry, I read that wrong, Dina. I thought somebody asked to include the questions that we asked. But so, you know, those are the questions that we wanted to know from the organizations is comp, DEI, remote work practices. That's the big thing right now. And then the individual responses. And, you know, some of the questions that we also asked were, you know, do you feel included in your decisions, right? As I said, can you bring your authentic selves to work? How important is it to know that leadership opportunities exist? We also really looked at the bigger the organization, does that mean that the more people are paid, right? Which is what we would think. And who's represented in C-suite jobs versus non-staff jobs. So that's a big part of what we did. And I will tell you that the survey was like a lot of questions. It was a lot of information. It was a lot of things. It took a long time for people to fill out. So for those of you who did fill this out, thank you for doing it, because this was really very helpful for us. So any?
Yeah, well, at the moment we don't.
Also, if you guys don't mind just muting yourselves, because I'm assuming that that's not somebody in your office, Dina, right? So just everybody who doesn't have a question, just do me a favor and mute yourselves. Okay. So Jen, I'm old and my eyes are very, very tired. I don't know.
This. We're good. I got you.
You can see?
Except I'm older than you are, but thanks, Matt. Well, I'm just going to give you a real brief highlight of kind of who responded, just so you have an understanding of what the sample is. Obviously, our conclusions are limited to the sample. This is not a peer-reviewed academic study, but just to give you a sense of who we heard from. In terms of focus area, pretty broad distribution of types of nonprofit. This is the organizational sample, again, the 115. So the biggest chunk is human services, sort of broadly speaking, but that's a fifth of the sample, followed by housing, including homeless shelters and other kinds of housing supportive agencies at about 16%, and then rounding out sort of the majority, or about, you know, the top half are cultural, arts, and museums organizations. So you can hopefully see that this is directly, these charts are directly from the report that will be coming out sometime in the next few weeks. And then budget size as well, pretty broadly distributed. The modal chunk, if you will, is in the $2 to $5 million budget range. So that's more than a quarter. 1 to 2 million is another 19%, and 5 to 10 million is 14%. So a little bit skewed on the larger size of organizations for organizational responses. I did want to highlight the geography. Sorry, this one doesn't look as nice. It's not actually in the report, but I wanted to show it to you. You know, obviously heavily weighted to Los Angeles County. These are counties on the organizational that we are based in Pasadena. Large chunk of our client base and our network is in Los Angeles County, so 69% there. Thank you, Santa Barbara. Another 10% came from Santa Barbara organizations and 6% from Ventura. So combined, we've got 16% from Ventura and Santa Barbara County in the sample of 115 organizations that responded. And then on the individual side, yeah, a lot of women, overrepresentation of women in the sample as compared to the California nonprofit workforce that we know is 63% female. We're a little overrepresented in our sample with 79%. And then race and ethnicity, 49% white, not too out of whack with the statewide nonprofit workforce. I believe the Race to Lead survey from a couple of years ago had 43% white response rate. So not too bad. 27% Hispanic or Latino, and Black or African American, only 6% in our individual sample. And then again, with the geography, a little even better representation from Ventura and Santa Barbara here, 19% combined, and 2/3 LA County on the, and to be clear, this is not where folks live, it's where they work or where their organization serves in terms of county. we're going to talk, we're going to sort of three big chunks of findings. And the report actually has four. We've smushed a couple together just in the interest of time and giving you really a sampling is really all we have, and real key highlight takeaways today. So we have a section in the report called The Great Reshuffle and a multi-generational workforce. So we're kind of just talking about that as attrition, because that is such a key challenge, key concern for employers and employees who are within organizations, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about attrition.
Okay.
You want to go ahead? Yep.
Yeah, right. Okay. I will tell you one thing about attrition that I think is really important too. And pre-pandemic, which is really hard for us to even remember, attrition was huge. The organization that I was on the board of, I think we had 50% at any given time. We were looking for people to fill positions. So this is not a new phenomenon because of COVID. It's not great, but it's not a new phenomenon. So just want everybody to remember, like this has been going on for a very long time. And I'm sure most of you at the majority of your nonprofits are trying to fill positions as we speak. That's crazy to me, by the way, that 47% of organizations struggle to retain employees. That's half of us. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Employers, you can see, think it's about competitive pay and burnout. We in the nonprofit space we're working night times, weekends. This is our job. Our families are our coworkers and our staff. So that burnout piece is really important because we do this because we want to. And I will say that remote and flexible work has helped. And certainly, I think a lot of staff right now, I will tell you what's very interesting that's going to be happening. I'm seeing a lot of senior staff, right? The VP staff, the CPO, CDO staff who don't want to come back to the office, but the CEOs want them to come back to the office. And so that's been very interesting as well as things are changing and as people are going back. I think in my own most humble opinion, if our line staff have to work with our clients, I feel like our senior staff should have to also come to the office. But that's my own bias in there. But I will tell you that that flexible piece really has worked to keep people. But just remember that half of us struggle to retain employees, which is insane. And then this one I thought was really so interesting, right? If you look at this and you see, this is half pretty much of the people that we surveyed who took the survey said that they were very satisfied. 42% said that they were somewhat satisfied, which is better than nothing, right? Not great, not bad. 45% very satisfied on their job. But then when you go back to the other side, are you looking to leave within the next year? A third are. And that is also it is just very interesting when you think about this as a board member or, as a CEO for your staff. Half of the folks that you have right now are thinking about leaving. And so trying to keep them, that's going to be really important if you want to. As much as I want business for my company, I don't want you to have to call me and say, hey, half of my staff have just left. So when you are looking at this report, you're looking at the findings and you're looking at what people say and how we are doing as a nonprofit workspace, think about it this way, that you have so many folks who are truly looking to leave, even if half of them are satisfied. So it's something to know. I love to, what I love to do, and I can't do it in person, but I would love at some point to do a poll here, would be of you on the call. How many of you are looking to leave in the next 6 months to a year? It's very interesting when we get those surveys. That's the one great thing about Zoom. We can do like a poll, and it's anonymous. And I will tell you that, again, it usually tracks half of the folks are looking. So that's that one. And then, if you're looking at potentially why people stay and looking to advance in their careers, I can read all this to you, but these are some of the really important findings that have come out, that nearly 3/4 of employees, again, who took the survey, do believe that they have advancement opportunities, but it is different on age. And that's really important to keep in mind when you're looking at your employees who are older. Just a quarter of employees think that they, at their organization, people can grow into jobs. And, the smaller the organization, there are only so many positions that are available to move up in. But the larger organizations, this is true for them all. Like very few folks do believe that you can move up in your organization, which is also not great. We should be doing everything we can to keep our staff, to train our staff, and to build them up so that they can move up and we don't have to lose them to other organizations. And if you look there, more than 1 in 3 employees agreed, right? Because we asked that question, do you think that, your colleagues would have to leave to get a promotion? Yeah, 1/3 think that they do. So again, I think what's really important, and the question that I ask in an interview is, what would you do to keep your staff? What do you believe that training needs to happen in your team? How do you want to move people up? And should you? And I will tell you that I think it's really important to train your team. And one of the things that's really important to train your team on is the budget. If you were to take just go around and ask your staff if they understand how budgets work, if they understand what line items are, you have staff who always complain that senior management doesn't let them do anything, right? They want to, for example, at my homeless shelter, my programming staff really wanted to have birthdays for every single one of our kids. And they really wanted to have a big celebration. And I was like, okay, here's the budget. Here's how much money we have for food. If you can figure this out, happy to have a party, right? And that training was really important because for me, it was helpful to move, first of all, for them to know what was going on at the organization and why decisions are made the way they are. But then also to really train people to move up. So we have a few recommendations when it comes to keeping staff, advancing staff, making them happy, and not having to worry so much with attrition. And I'm actually curious, how many of you, if any of you want to I guess, say yes on the chat. How many of you conduct an annual employment engagement survey? Just out of curiosity. Do I see any yeses? Or actually, you know what? Okay, great. Anna, now I'm calling on you. Turn yourself off of mute for a second. See, this is what happens when you say yes. Do you mind sharing with the folks on the call what that looks like?
Good morning. So HR sends out an annual survey, and actually just for this year, maybe even last year, it's actually been a couple of surveys, and they are anonymous, and we're just getting feedback. Well, I'm not HR, feedback on who is working remotely, what is working, what is not. Do you prefer to go into the office? For those who are doing part office, part remote, what is working for you, what is not, what are your concerns? And then this year, there's been some feedback regarding salaries and inflation and how that is impacting the employees. There's been feedback, oh my goodness, I could go on and on, new employees that were onboarded during the pandemic, and the pay incoming for them versus someone who started 5 years ago, and it's very different. And how did so-and-so come in at this pay when I'm barely making that now after having been here X amount of years? And anything from safety to stress management, what can we do to alleviate stress? And recently there was a survey sent out. What do you prefer? Do you want like a 3-day retreat for employees? Do you want a day at the amusement park with your family? So it's just a lot of different things.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And now here's what's going to happen. No one's going to raise their hand. But actually, so I'm going to ask one of you, either Sean or Fanny, whichever one you want to take, or Beth, actually, Beth Henry, for one of the eye-opening results, I guess, or one of the something that came back from the survey that you were like, okay, we're going to change the way we do something, or something that just came back that you weren't expecting. that you think people should know about? Any of you could take it, whatever. Any of
I'll take it, Matt. Good morning, Matt. I think for me, was hearing from staff, because one of our questions is about, do you feel there's promotional, promotion opportunities for promotion? So, and my previous nonprofit, not where I'm now, had 5 programs. And so there was lots of opportunity in my eyes when I took over to move between programs, but the staff didn't feel that they had that opportunity. And so hearing that staff didn't feel there were opportunities for growth was really eye-opening, because when I came on board, I thought, yeah, they could move all around, and as they get degrees, they could become a teacher, they could become a mental health therapist. There were all these options, but the staff didn't feel there were options. And so that was eye-opening, which then caused us to create all these university partnerships so that people could go back to school. And, there were lots of universities that were willing to cut the tuition to get a bunch of our staff going there, and online opportunities. So it really provided an opportunity to show our staff we were invested, and we would invest in them, and we don't want them to go somewhere else. We want them to find, either move up the chain in their own program or move to another program and try another option. So that was really surprising to me.
Thank you, Sean. So that engagement survey is really key. And, I know that I understand that we're also so slammed and so busy and have so much to do. And it's yet one more thing. And every once in a while, by the way, you don't want to get that feedback. You just don't want to hear that negative feedback. I also fully understand that. Because it's like, come on, guys, let's just do our job. But at the end of the day, it is so important to do that. It is really important. And it's sometimes, you need to know what can be done better. And by the way, boards should also really have those conversations with their CEOs as well. I really think one of the most important things for a board to think about when you're looking at your executive director is just to ask them how they're doing. I don't think staff do that as much as they should either to their leadership, but boards can do that better. What are you doing? How can we help you? What's going on? What keeps you up at night? All those good things. For any board members on the call, just check in. Every once in a while, just check in. That's my advice to you. And then that providing and promoting awareness of career pathways, kind of as Sean was talking about, is really important. And I'm curious, one more yes or no. Does anybody have any kind of mentoring program at their organization? And you know what that means. I think it's, making sure that you have somebody in senior team working with folks on line staff or wherever it is to kind of help them and train them and move them up or answer their questions or anything like that. Does anybody have any kind of mentoring program? Okay. All right, well, something to think about then, guys. It's, again, that training is really important. And actually, I do have one last question. Does anybody on the call do consistent training to their staff? Not training that they have to do, right? Like, not what your contracts tell you to do, but training in terms of this is what you should know in nonprofit. This is how you become a manager. Does anybody do anything like that?
I do that kind of training with my staff at Interface Children and Family Services.
So what does that look like, Kelly? What are some of the things that your staff ask you the most?
Mm-hmm. What I've started doing the last 2 years is investing in staff with leadership training programs like from Cornell that are online. So just building in the management training that some staff maybe would have never had an opportunity to get. Just trying to work that into my budget so that staff that I know that are aspiring to someday have my job, that I'm giving them the ability to, get the skills that they need so that they don't have to go somewhere else to get it and then come back someday. So
that's great. And so this is what I know people are going to ask you. How do you have the bandwidth to do all that? How do you have the time to do all of that?
Yeah, it's actually really difficult. I would say that a lot of it, I'm providing the opportunity to staff and they're needing to self-manage and make sure that they're working through that material themselves. I'm not really don't have the capacity to be checking on them and making sure they're actually doing their homework or passing classes or whatever. It's really on them to get the skills and then to demonstrate they have them afterwards, when we're working on projects later. I don't really have that. And I thought of that when you were asking about mentoring. Even my own organization, we talk about mentoring opportunities all the time and how we should be doing that. And we even have a mentor, 2 mentors from our leadership team to our mid-level leadership team. But I think if you don't have someone who is championing that, or someone who it's their job to be building strategy around that, then it's not going to be super effective, because we all have something that we have to do, and we can't constantly be looking at, mentoring staff under us. It is quite difficult unless it's someone's job to be looking at training and mentoring all the time.
Yeah. And my last question for you, and I really appreciate you coming on and volunteering like that. When was the last time someone just checked in with you?
About
Your morale, about your exhaustion level, about, anything.
Yeah, I don't think that happens too often, but I am good about sharing that. During COVID, I realized that I had taken on a lot more workload and was keeping a lot of the struggles to myself. So when I'm in my teams with our executive team and our officers team, I'm on the officers team now, I'll let people know right away if I'm having an issue, or if I've had, hey, like last week, I had a really big fight with my 16-year-old son, and I almost never fight with him. And in the morning, I was super tired and just had been up late thinking about it. So I let people know in the meeting right away, like, hey, I've had a really rough night with my son and I'm feeling upset still, and just want to warn you, I may not be at my top, performance now. I feel like maybe we're not checking in with each other very often, but I try to share if I'm having an issue, so that people don't assume that I'm not interested in the meeting or not interested in what they're saying, that I have other things on my mind. So
thank you, Kelly, and thank you for sharing that. I think that, I see Beth, that, you're shorthanded, which by the way is true for all of us, right? That's what you have a board for. Don't forget you have a board, and sometimes a lot of those board members actually are smart and have real professional experience. So when you think about mentoring your staff, first of all, don't just think about management or middle management. I'm talking about the whole team. Now, if you have a team of like 2,000 people, of course, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, right? But think about just all your staff. They're in this for a reason. And again, I realize, okay, that I ran 2 or 3 organizations, actually. I know it's exhausting. I get all of that. But at the same time, folks want to move up, folks want to learn. So do your best, whether it's using your board or, even one of the things that I did was on a quarterly basis. I just did a training, and anybody who wanted to come could come. And it was 4 trainings a year for my whole team. And I think my largest staff that I have is probably like 400 people. So, and it was, okay, this is what a budget looks like. Let's go through the line items. Let me explain to you how we build it, right? And that's for everybody, not just middle management or HR. HR is a really big deal. People don't know the law. Most people don't know the difference between what exempt and non-exempt means. And by the way, a lot of us in the nonprofit space are illegally classifying our staff. So please make sure that you know the difference between exempt and non-exempt, really important. But train folks on HR, for example. There's a lot of things that you can train people in. So just remember, like, that's what your board is for, and that's how you keep people, because this attrition thing is really a big deal. And honestly, you can make, there goes my phone. My phone never rings until I'm doing these things. You could make more money, of course, like at, for example, Kaiser, than you would, direct staff at any organization. But you want to keep people, that's how you do it. So just one more thing I just wanted to share. And again, I know how exhausted we are. I know all of that, but just be sure. And also kind of what Kelly said, which thank you very much, Kelly, is that as a CEO, as an executive director, please, please, please tell your board what you're going through, because again, that's what they're there for. Your board is there to support you. So just be sure that you check in, and that you also check in on a regular basis. Okay, before we move on, because Jen's gonna kill me because I'm taking way too much time. Does anybody have any last thing they want to share about maybe helping folks not with attrition before we move on to the next section?
Actually, Carrie has her hand up.
Oh, I didn't see, I can't
Hey,
see.
Carrie.
Hi. So I had a question about the 4th bullet, and if you've had, this is the partnership with peer organizations to develop employee advancement pathways. Do you have examples of that, of organizations that have done that? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, well, you know what? I can absolutely I'll just give you one of mine, for example, just what we do at Envision, what we've done at Envision. So we've had folks who have come in to work for us who wanted to move up. And so we worked with other organizations to have them kind of go and volunteer and learn what it means to be a whatever it is, an HR manager or a program manager or a fundraising manager, right? And kind of give them those opportunities to learn about it and then kind of help them go get that job. So it's the same kind of idea. If you're a small organization, there are ways to sort of show people how to do other things. But also one of the other things that you can do, if you can in your budget, is help with some kind of like, here's $100 stipend to go get your certification, right? Whatever certification is in HR or fundraising. I forget the acronyms, but we can there's all those certifications, right? So those are other ways that you can keep, first of all, that's a way that you can keep your staff on too, right? By the way, because if it's a 2-year program, well, $100 a month, you're kind of helping them and you're keeping them on. So just other ideas to work with other organizations. In the developmentally disabled world, there's a cohort of like so many organizations that are together that meet on a monthly basis, and there are ways to partner for staff to learn things that they're not getting at their organization. So just, again, it's ways of trying to make your staff feel important, feel included, and that you care about their advancement in life. That's important. So that's what I mean by that. That's what we mean by that. I hope that answers your question. And by the way, it's good to see your face. Anybody else?
Actually, Mike Teasdale. Hi, Mike. Great to see you, or sort of see you this morning. Actually put a really great summation in the chat. Knowing what your employees' career goals after their current job is key, so you can help them with their career goals. I mean, that really kind of brings it home in a really succinct way. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, Jen. Now it's on you for the next section, right?
Cool. Let's talk about pay and benefits as the second section. Again, real highlight, key takeaway kind of, and this fits really together because some of the benefits we're talking about have to do with professional development as well, right? That's a big piece. So, oh, sorry. What direct? Matt sort of alluded to this earlier, where we would kind of expect that the larger the organization, kind of the higher the salary scale. I know this is probably really hard to read. So this is the organizational survey. And what we learned is that median entry-level base pay is stuck kind of around $32,000 across organizations of all budget sizes. So this is the white line here, right? That's median base pay. While executive annual base wage climbs significantly. That's the yellow one for organization size. So we're starting with, not too big a gap down here with the organizations that are under $500,000 a year. And then we just start to here, starting with the 2 to 5 million, almost sort of that proverbial hockey stick kind of growth here. So just something to be, to acknowledge. And again, this came from the organizational survey. This is not employee perception. This is the real stuff that we're getting from CEOs. I have clicked on something else, so now I have to. There we go. We also found some racial differences in median salaries. So in particular, folks in their 30s and 40s, so sort of mid-career, white employees were earning between $5,000 a year, not too bad, but still a gap, and $20,000 a year more than their BIPOC peers. And this is divided by fields of service, right? So we've got child welfare and early childhood on this end, youth development here. The bigger ones are in social justice and youth development in particular, the bigger gaps. So just, we've still got some equity considerations for folks who we presume are mid-career in particular. So folks in their, this is by age, again, in their 30s and 40s. Also, gender gap, it's here too. We're covering them all. Notable disparity in median annual base pay. among male and female CEOs and executive directors. This is in the individual survey. So this is the self-reported. And it's across almost all budget sizes. These are the budget sizes of the organizations, but tends to get a little bigger again with larger budget annual revenue organizations. So this is the 20 to 40 million here and the over 100 million here. Now, you'll notice some budget sizes have been left out. You might notice, if you can read this, there's only 66 data points in this survey, right? So there are only 66 respondents we're including, or in this chart, because there were some categories where we just didn't have enough respondents to make that comparison. Benefits, we talked a lot about benefits, and we did a side-by-side comparison of what we just put a list of benefits in the survey, the individual survey, and said, what do you want most? What's most important to you for individual employees? And then we also asked the employers, do you offer this benefit? In general, the majority of organizations responding to the survey do offer sort of the top 5. And in 3 cases, as you'll see, the flexible work schedule, the employer retirement contribution, the remote work option, we're at 60% or more. Still not huge. It is a majority. And medical benefits for dependents was far and away the top requested, wished for, desired benefit among employees. 51% is not super stellar. Yeah, it's a majority, but it's not super, right? Also just want to point out professional development stipend did hit in the top 5. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the survey actually asked employers, do you provide professional development? I don't know if we specifically asked about a stipend. That's one thing I meant to go back and check on. So there's not totally sure that's an apples to oranges matchup on this particular one. And only 10 for a tuition reimbursement, which is in the top 10 here. Student loan repayment didn't even rank big enough to give us a little green bar here. So just some considerations for benefits. Since we do have constraints on compensation, how can we maybe bring along, and again, focus on the retention and the advancement pieces that help folks be committed and engaged and want to stay. This one's really busy. This is about remote work in particular. And we asked the organizational respondents, so generally CEOs and executive directors who were answering on behalf of their organizations, about, what do you see as the biggest benefits and the biggest drawbacks of remote work? Cost savings to employees came across as, hey, we think we're doing the right thing, that we're saving our employees money in terms of travel time and maybe now granted this was in October to January, spending money on gas. We're allowing them improved work-life balance. There's pretty universal understanding of what folks think is going on in terms of the benefits and drawbacks. The drawbacks being isolation, lack of community, and ineffective management. 40% of organizational respondents said that remote work is available only to staff in certain roles. So perhaps an inequity consideration, as Matt said earlier. If you've got line staff that have to be responding to in person for clients, might be more beneficial to have everybody in person and have sort of the same level of balance or some way to offset that imbalance. And 23% said that remote work is allowed a few days a week. So it seems like we've got hardly anybody that's either all remote or all in person. So there's lots of hybrid and mix going on at this point, or was as of October to January. So recommendations here, in addition to the employee engagement survey, conduct an organization-wide pay assessment at least every other year. And transparency is something we kept hearing in particular from employees in the focus groups and in the open-ended responses. Simply being transparent goes a long way. Of course, it can also create some concerns, but offering that accountability of here's what we're doing in terms of our pay bands and as far as opportunities for advancement and what the structure of the organization is, and be transparent about that. So I'm going to take out a Matt's page out of Matt's playbook. How many of you have done pay assessments, compensation assessments? Can I see the chat? You can just throw it in the chat or give me a thumbs up with the reaction. No, Sean's going through it now. Doing one this year. Okay. Have you found it to be useful, eye-opening, concerning? Oh shoot, let's never do that again. What's been the experience? Sean, you've only been at your agency for a month and it's already eye-opening. Is that what you're saying?
Jennifer, I have no problem calling on people, by the way. I love doing that. So.
Yeah. Fine,
Jennifer, it's more than eye-opening, it's frightening. Yeah.
When recruiting, I do grassroots research. Okay. So we're also recommending offering benefits to part-time employees, not just to full-time employees, as a way to kind of, again, broaden that equity and retention piece. And building out, we talked about it's the compensation, but there's really this double whammy of low compensation and high burnout. That came out really, really, really clearly in the focus groups that the Center for Nonprofit Management did around, attached to this survey and this study is, not only is our compensation constrained, but man, the last 2 years have just been rough and exhausting and stressful, and particularly in youth services and mental health spaces, and everywhere, right? So building out some kind of, we were talking earlier about just checking in, right? And being honest and candid and open about the stresses and all the different balls we all have in the air. But in addition, can you build out some low or no cost personal wellness and work-life balance benefits in some way?
Jen, did the survey reflect on what some of those low and no cost wellness benefits might
just going
include?
to acknowledge what Sharon, Sharon asked that. An employee assistance plan, right, where you have some access to some sort of therapy or connecting your folks to professional development in their field groups or supportive, a development directors roundtable where, hey, we can all talk about this stuff and be vulnerable together, kind of thing. Matt, do you have anything else you've heard some of our clients doing?
One of the cool things that I thought one of our clients did was and it is a little bit of a cost, just so you all know, but 2 days a month they made a half day, which was great. And one of the things that we do is that we make sure that at least one Monday every month we're closed. So like July 4th, we're closed, right? So July wouldn't have that, but June doesn't have a day off. So June we're closed actually next Monday. Something else that you can do. In New York, there's like half days on Fridays in the summer. Everybody's out by noon. So, personal wellness is one thing. Work-life balance is really important. Things like that are really important to understand that, you have other things to do. So, and also, the other thing, I know this is not what you said. It's not a bullet in here, Jen, but there's something else that I thought was really cool. It's also great to have some kind of like team building. So again, one of the things that we do, or we did actually, we need to do it again, Jen. We completely failed this year. Is like a group outing for like volunteering together. So one night 2 years ago, we did at Union Station Rescue. We took care of a meal and we, organized it, cooked it, served it. It was great. Something else that we want our staff to do is just volunteer for half a day once a month. Volunteer at any nonprofit. So things like that just make staff feel like you care. We come to work, we clock in, we clock out. A lot of us bring work home with us. So making sure, again, that personal wellness piece is you're not working past 6 p.m. at night. And if you are taking time off the next day or the following week. Those kinds of things are what I think are really affordable wellness things. And the board, again, I expect you guys to lean on the board for this stuff, especially leadership. Like, we work too hard. We shouldn't be working that hard. We've got families. So those are the kinds of things. And I don't know, if we were, again, to take a poll, I am guaranteeing you that at least two thirds of you are exhausted. This last 2 years have been exhausting. So just making sure that you acknowledge that and even listen to your staff, ask them for ideas, doesn't hurt. Sorry.
Okay. Any other questions, or anybody want the final word on this section before we get to go talk about representation, leadership, and DEI?
Well, has anybody asked their staff, like, what are some things that we can do for you? Has anybody asked, aside from working from home, this remote thing is driving me crazy, but like, is there anything else that folks have, asked their staff for that you've heard, again, aside from working from home? See, now everybody's quiet. Oh, Kelly, you're up. Are you going to say something? You're it. You're my star. You and Sean are my star today. Just wanted to say.
Childcare assistants, childcare.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
Gas stipends or transportation assistance.
Yeah.
And Carrie, you're my star too.
I was thinking about your last bullet on the last slide, thinking, do some nonprofits give special benefits to executive team or officers team? And if somebody could privately email a list of those and what those are, that'd be great.
Well, things like retirement. Sometimes retirement benefits are only.
I see.
Yeah.
I've not seen that personally, so interesting.
Yeah.
I love that meal delivery for long work sessions. That's awesome. That's really that's a good thing. I mean, again, if you have a huge staff, it's one thing, but we try at our office to bring in lunch, once a week or every other week. We bring in the favorite meal that we bring in for our staff is like a huge dim sum meal. And we all get to hang out and not talk about work. We talk about other things around that lunch table, not work. So that's really cool. I like that idea. Okay.
Jared, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I shared briefly in the chat, but I'll just say that one of the big things that we did was start full benefits at 20 hours a week. So many people in the nonprofit sector have 2 jobs. And if they've got a 30-hour job and a 10-hour job, nobody's giving them benefits.
Right.
So by starting at 20 hours, that was a huge thing for folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're going to get into this in the case study also, but Jeff shared in the chat adopting a compensation philosophy as a first step in evaluating the compensation and benefits. And Jared, I'm sorry, it started flowing a little bit fast for me to catch it. I apologize.
I missed it. Yeah.
And let's see here, board approved and prepared our exec team and personnel committee.
That's the answer on the assessment, right?
Yes.
Comp assessment.
We got the meal deliveries. That's awesome. A few people said an EAP program, and I haven't, it was just shared with staff like a couple days ago, but Cal Lutheran made an app available to staff and faculty. It's called the Ginger Wellness app. I haven't dove into it yet, so I really can't represent it. But some of those meditation apps were really popular a couple of years ago for staff. And some of the sort of enterprise licensing made it affordable.
Okay.
I was going to suggest you can also tack on usually to your health insurance I don't know what they call it, like a wellness rider. So like Kaiser has a pretty cheap option to add massage therapy and acupuncture, things like that. Our staff really like that.
Matt, we forgot our in-office wellness benefit. We actually have a massage chair in our office in one little small room that folks can just go take a few minutes.
We
You
do.
know, and that motivates people to come to the office as well.
And Jen, we do Friday afternoons happy hour every once in a while. So yeah, no, there's again, it's just, again, we're all overloaded, we're all busy, but think about what you would want. And then, just try and make your staff feel a little bit more that you care about them, that you do care about them, right? And that you do want to give them things that will make their lives easier and better.
Okay. Dina, we are running up on our time, aren't we? My apologies.
It's okay.
Okay.
This part is really important.
Yeah, I can't skip this, sorry. So we, if you can see those sort of bubbles, we just asked at the organizational level, what DEI practices have you actually put in place? So up here at the top, floating to the top because they're bigger, more helium in them. Collecting board race data, that's almost everybody, 86%. Same with DEI focused board recruiting, DEI conversations. So, that's more than 3/4 of organizations. I'm actually a little surprised it's not higher than that. Have at least had some conversations. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to us over the past couple of years? 3/4 are doing some level of recruiting that is focused in integrating conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But down at the bottom, only 30% have actually fully embraced and included DEI into hiring policies explicitly. Only 32%, so again, a third, a little less than a third, have done a DEI survey, which one would think could be integrated with an employee engagement inclusion kind of survey as well. Surprisingly, it is a majority, but it's just a majority, are collecting client race data. So if we're thinking about being inclusive and serving our communities, we think that might be a little higher. 40% of survey participants, and I believe this is at the individual survey, agreed or strongly agreed that their organization's boards of directors are racially diverse. So I'm guessing that is an advancement over what we might have heard 2 or 3 years ago, but still we got a way to go. Again, acknowledging our small sample size, this is not incredibly rigorous. This is not peer reviewed academic, but we do have a higher proportion of white folks represented as CEOs and executive directors in our sample as compared to the racial distribution of the full sample. So representation at leadership we're at the green is the racial makeup of the EDs and CEOs in our sample. So 2/3 of the CEOs and executive directors we heard of were white. And I believe, if I remember correctly, we had 49% respondents. Well, not if I remember, it's right there in the white, 49% of the sample overall. So this is based on a series of questions that we asked, that we sort of created a weighted average index. So employees of all races, so we're comparing here white respondents, BIPOC respondents, and Black respondents broken out in different ways, as a level of agreement on a scale of, I believe, it's got to be 5, has to be 5. So 5 would be the max weighted average score here, right? Employees of all races are relatively close, right, on how likely they are to agree that they feel valued and included. And again, this is based on a sort of a set of nearly affiliated correlated questions. When we add there is a difference clearly here in When we pull out executive directors and CEOs, the white CEOs have a much higher score on feeling valued and included. Again, that same series of questions than Black CEOs. What I have to acknowledge here is there are only 2 or 3 Black CEOs in this sample. So this is not a super reliable, rigorous comparison. So I have to give you that caveat. When we asked about the DEI culture, we have a strong DEI culture. Our organization is very representative of our community. White respondents, individual respondents, and male individual respondents both were more likely to say yes and perceive more diversity and stronger DEI culture in their organizations than their female peers and their Black peers. At the same time, 60% of individual participants did say that their organizations are supportive of people of color. 43 overall agree that they see actual evidence of DEI values and in practice. Strong correlation when we started doing some crosstab types of analysis. Employees who say that they can see that their organization makes a strong investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion also are the same folks who say their organization has a strong advancement culture and that their organization is a great place to work, that they're satisfied to work at. So definitely feeling the connection between the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion with this is a place I want to be and a place I want to stay. Oh, pardon me. Just want to take a couple more minutes. There are more recommendations than this in the study, in the report itself. I tried to boil them down. If you actually haven't already, doing some really intentional, thoughtful, what does it mean to this organization to embrace and exhibit and embody diversity, equity, and inclusion with your board is really crucial. What do we need to do? Where are we? How do we integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion lens into any strategic planning, any conversations about updating or articulating vision and mission, organizational development assessments, and outcomes evaluations. You can't set it aside. We have to call it out specifically. And we're seeing that in all the work that we're doing on our strategy side. It's either a specific goal within any plan we're doing, or there are objectives and clear strategies linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of the goals. It kind of depends on client preference, but it's certainly in a part of all those big question, capital B, capital Q conversations that we're having about our organizations and moving forward and planning for the future. Again, this one, creating a DEI plan linked to whatever, so even if you're not doing a strategic plan right now, and including questions about DEI and inclusion in particular in all employee engagement surveys as we referenced earlier. Has anybody done Dina, if you don't mind me taking just a couple more minutes, has anybody had experience with, I know Jared has, doing an actual DEI plan, creating a task force, hiring somebody specifically focused to lead that piece of the organization's work and make it real? And what's the experience been like?
Wait, I can speak up. We're doing this.
Is that you, Carrie? Okay,
yeah.
Great.
So we are doing this now. We hired an outside consultant to help us with training. So we're doing learning cohorts throughout the year, and we're slowly. The hard part is, we're a service organization, so a lot of these things were easier to do during COVID when everybody was working from home. We were offering remote services. It's getting a lot harder now, particularly with the with our hiring crisis. But we have hired somebody specifically to implement an organizational strategy about equity in our programs, but not particularly for staff.
Mhm.
And so I'm heading up our DEI staff committee. And I would say there's a loose plan, but we're also being very open to redirecting when we get feedback from staff. So I would say the biggest, and our board has been, we have a budget for it. We have all of those things that are in your little bubbles. We've been doing, we have a budget. We've got a budget for the committee. The hardest part, I think, right now is really the time.
Yeah.
And even if we have somebody, even though we've had somebody dedicated somewhat, at least through programs, it's hard to free up time from staff to dedicate to this. And it is also hard when you're doing this. We have this, our council, our DI staff council. These are also individuals who provide service. And so there's not a lot of extra time to be on subcommittees, to, the way that I've seen it work in other organizations where there are mostly knowledge workers who are maybe correctly or incorrectly are exempt staff and have more control over their time. This has been, that's been the challenge with working with direct service providers who are hourly employees, is making that time.
Jen, can I just weigh in? Because I think that
Please.
Sharon Cromartie just answered for a vast majority of us.
Yeah.
It's definitely been the experience of anecdotal conversations, and that is hired a consultant. Challenge has been follow up to help keep DEI front and center, and particularly with regard to staff. We're outward focused to our clients, and we often assume that we're also paying attention internally. I N of one, definitely going to raise my hand on that one. It's an experience that creeps into our work also.
It should, the other thing that I would tell you is that it is staff, but it also really important, that top one for boards, really important. And one of the things also that you can think about, there are only so many folks out there, but one of the things you can think about is bringing in a board member who is really strong in DEI training. And then you have a free person on your board who could help you. But I know we're all looking for, the same people, but it's just really important that you constantly look internally and not just what you're doing with your clients. So, what Sharon said is 1,000% correct. It's yet one more thing to add to your plate. So again, all of this is like one more thing to do. And again, it's, we realize in all of this that like in nonprofit, we are, of course, overstretched and underpaid and exhausted and all of that. But, if you do these things, hopefully it actually does get better.
So I kind of come at it as a slightly different way. It's like, how can we afford not to? I'm really suffering from, sort of progress versus perfection. So that's a whole nother workshop topic for another time. I wanted to ask a question that was in the chat box. I think it's more of a methodology question, and I think it was in comparison to some of the ranking that you just presented, Jennifer, and that was just clarity when in the organizational sample, who within the organization, was there a self-identification of what role that respondent played within the organization if they were representing the organization as a whole?
There was, and I need to double check myself before I am willing to answer that. I believe it was all CEOs, but we may have also accepted like a COO, or somebody high enough to have visibility into all of the roles and salaries for the roles. But it had to be, they had to complete that. And in some cases, honestly, I think it may have been a joint effort between folks that, hey, I've started, right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm going to do a last call here for any questions. And Matt and Jen, thank you so much for sharing that body of work. Really, really appreciate the presentation. Any questions, you're welcome to take yourself off mute, or if you'd like to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to move us forward. I'm also going to say that in the interest of time, we're going to just transition to our next segment, but this is being recorded. It will be shared afterwards. I'm sensitive to people needing to stand up, bio breaks, coffee refills, but please feel free to go ahead and do that at your convenience and preference while we get Larry and his colleagues loaded up. Patricia is asking in the chat box if whether or not the slides will be shared after today's session. I'm getting a little head shake yes from Matt, so we'll go ahead and put that in the post event. And Larry, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen, I will just say yes. I have a friend who is a compensation specialist named Larry Comp, and that is like the best takeaway for today's workshop. When we were trying to figure out a way to sort of animate the findings of the study you just heard a little bit about, we wanted to kind of lift up a nonprofit organization, and reached out to Larry, who is the founder of LTC Performance Strategies. He's joined today by his colleague Norb Garrett, and asked if he was currently working with a nonprofit organization who could maybe serve as a case study for today. And that's why our colleague Sandy is with us today. So Sandy's the CFO of the Peterson Automotive Museum, and they're wrapping up some extensive work with Larry and his team. But suffice it to say, all these questions about compensation assessment, compensation philosophy, HR practices internally, I've been sending pretty regularly to Larry, not just because of his last name, but because of his growing body of work in the nonprofit space. So we thought we would invite this panel discussion presentation just to kind of take it to another level, a little bit of a sneak peek inside of an organization that said, we really need to move the needle in this. It's not going to hit on all of the, specifically on all of the areas, but I think that it's going to lift up quite a bit of what you just heard in the research study. So Larry, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and transition over to you really quickly and welcome Sandy, Norb, and Larry.
Great. Can everybody hear okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we've gotten a chance to get to know Dean, and she is just a love, and I'm so proud of what you're doing and how you juggle everything, and we're so appreciative of the opportunity to piggyback on the first presentation. I know we came late to the party, but I think what you're going to find is that our case study dovetails very closely with what you just heard from Jen's and Matt's presentation. So the case study is something that we've done over the last 6 months. It's interesting. We had a lot of training in change management, and we used to think that change took a lot of time. It took a long time, but in working with Sandy, you'll see that all of this work that you're going to see was done in about 5 months. So, and that's a big thank you to Sandy. So, so you're going to see that the case study really focuses on improving the performance of the organization, which I think is something everybody's interested in. The organizational performance, team and individual performance, while at the same time improving employee engagement and reducing unwanted turnover. You know, so you've heard a lot about the Great Resignation from Jen and Matt. You've been reading about it all the time, and that was a particular area of interest from Sandy. So I tend to talk pretty quick, pretty fast. So if anybody has any questions, you can use the chat box or jump in. But in terms of just an overall agenda, wanted to introduce Sandy, talk about, you'll see how this, what we're doing aligns with Envision Consulting's research study, share a little bit of the feedback we're getting from our clients in terms of benefits that they're experiencing from our engagements, provide an overview, of course, of the case study, and then see and talk about how this type of work would apply to other nonprofits. So I wanted to let you know that our mission has been to help 1,000 organizations address their most pressing compensation and performance solutions. And I'm delighted to say that we passed that last year. I think I've personally worked with about 1,100 organizations, and can honestly say that in doing this kind of work, you know, we've worked with thousands of executives, but Sandy's among the best. She's the intellectual curiosity that she demonstrates and the ownership in terms of her role and interest in driving the organization forward. I don't know if we've ever worked with a CFO at this that we've been as impressed with. So you'll have a chance to hear Sandy talk specifically about the case study and what she's learned and how that's working for them. So it's interesting. I mentioned that we've been blessed to work with just about every type and size organization, but interestingly, the fastest growing area of our practice is the nonprofit sector. We worked with about 140 organizations this last year. 24 were from nonprofits, and that percentage just keeps going up. Probably because, I mean, nonprofits and for-profits have the same types of issues, but there are a lot of struggles that nonprofits are particularly having in this tight market, which I think you'll agree is the tightest market we've seen in a very long time. And so we'll talk a lot more about that. So as far as our services, you're not going to relate to all of these. I don't know if sales compensation is a hot topic for you, but the question came up about benchmarking, and there's not a working day that goes by every week, every year. We're not doing compensation benchmarking for one or more of our clients. It's something that we're doing every day for many clients. And I'm going to ask you, how many of you actually have incentive plans in your organization? This is something that Dean and I were talking about because there seems to be two schools of thought. One is people join a nonprofit for the mission, and we don't need to pay incentives. On the other hand, the market's very tight, and nonprofits can't offer the same things that a for-profit can. And so we'll share a little bit about what we've seen with our own clients and our own research. But Dina, were you able to get a gauge on how many?
So I've got a one yes and one no.
Okay. So some of you might be surprised, and this comes out of the largest study that we came across of nonprofit incentive pay practices. This was done in 2018 across the country. And the finding was that 80% of those organizations provided short-term incentive plans. And when I say short-term, that's tied to performance of a year or less, typically what you would consider, what you would call an annual incentive plan. And of course, many of them are focused at the top of the organization, but we're getting more and more requests from our clients to help them provide a reasonable, I want to emphasize reasonable incentive plans for their lower level folks.
Larry, we do have another comment about a team-based incentive plan. If the organization had a good year, the whole team got a bonus, but not individual incentives per se.
Yeah, that's great. So most of the bonus programs that we put together are really focused on the overall team, because the success of the organization is the combined efforts of the individuals, their teams, and the overall organization. Not to use a lot of jargon, but we call it goal sharing. One word, GOALSHARING. It really means organizational wide incentive plans, but taking advantage of goals where you establish a small handful of goals at the top of the organization. We do a lot of training, not just on how to write goals as far as SMART goals, but how to select the right goals and how to align those and how to maximize engagement. But I would say the vast majority, and this is where Norb and I kind of live. We have a good team that does a lot of different things that you see here, but our focus is really more pay for performance, and it's generally for the whole organization. And we do that very carefully, and the results are usually very strong, very strong. And we are asked, this is kind of interesting. I know I could talk about this all day. People ask us, with these programs that we do, the organizational development combined with the goal setting and the incentives, what they should expect. And we usually say, well, you'll have good results the first year and very good the second year. By the third year, you're gonna have great results. And it's always fun to get a call 6 months into and say, hey, we're already kicking butt. And our answer is, all right, well, you're doing what we asked you to do. And the other thing we find with these plans is that they have stickiness, that they work so well that, and they're easy to just change the next year. Maybe you just change the goals some way, you change the weightings, but they tend to stay with an organization year after year, and they have multiple spillover benefits, as you'll see when Sandy starts talking about this. Does that address that, Dina? Okay, any other questions or comments regarding this? Okay. All right, so you've seen the headlines, and our good folks from Envision, we're all over this morning. The Great Resignation. This is the toughest market that we've ever seen. But we are seeing some interesting changes. I think we've all read that in annual reports that employees are our greatest asset, right? I see nod of heads. We've been reading that. We're starting to see things change a little bit in terms of it's our best employees, our greatest asset. So we're starting to see organizations change their compensation philosophies instead of just copying one another, where years ago, organizations used to say we paid the 75th percentile. Now most of them migrated to 50th percentile. A lot of the boards that we're working with, CEOs, executive directors, are saying, you know what, maybe the 50th percentile overall, meaning we want to pay around mid-market, but for our C-level folks or for our software engineers or for certain key people, we need to pay higher than the market. And they're also looking at particular individuals. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but the average merit increase for the last several years, I mean, kind of overlooking COVID because that was a little bit of a blip going in and hopefully starting to come out. The average increase has been about 3%, but we've had several board members, CEOs, business owners come to us and say, you know what, that's our overall budget, but we've gone to a few people quietly, and I'm going to emphasize very quietly, and given them up to 15% increases. And we told them, if you say anything, we're going to have to kill you. But it's something that we felt like we needed to do because they're now starting to be more strategic in terms of identifying those few folks or those folks in the organization that they really need to hold on to. So we are starting to see kind of a movement away from the general clustering, that we all want to be fair and be internally equitable. And a lot of our studies are really looking at not only internal equity, but also diversity from a compensation standpoint. But turnover, as you know, is very costly. The estimates range, but I'd say conservatively at least 30, 35%. And a lot of the experts say as you get to higher and higher roles, it's probably more like 100, 150% of somebody's pay. And so there is a little bit more of an intense focus on how much you're paying and who you're going to maybe treat a little bit differently. Any questions or comments about that?
I have a question.
Sure.
Since we know that, a lot of people or everyone, has implicit biases, do you think that this move towards singling people out, in terms of getting higher pay, do you think that that's a trend that's worrisome, or do you think that I guess, would you caution against that, or do you think that it's a positive trend?
No, it's a great question, and it's worrisome because the hot word this year in the probably last 2 years in compensation has been transparency. So organizations want to be increasingly transparent. And when people ask us how transparent we should be, I say it depends on the quality of your compensation and your performance development program. So it hasn't been a concern from those organizations like Peterson, where we're really looking at compensation and performance development. And the program is very solid. But the organizations realize that they are also they're subject to employee relations issues, legal issues, and so the ones we're working with tread in this area very carefully. They're very transparent. They share their philosophy. They share their objectives. We work with them on clarifying their roles. We benchmark the positions. We slot people into pay bands. We have tools that we've created that look at where somebody should be in a pay band based on not their years of experience, but their level of proficiency. So I would say that if an organization is not prepared to tackle this, then they have to be very careful. But again, this is something we do every day. We've done for over 1,000 organizations, and when we're brought in, it's a very detailed process to make sure we're doing everything we can to help look at how people are paid against the market, and then also internal equity, and also the diversity analysis. So it's always the what and how. Everything we're looking at is what did you do and how did you do it? And we always let people know, you need to be, you can't have a good compensation program without a good communication program. So when we mean it's actually better to have a good program communicated very well than an excellent one that people don't understand.
So Larry, I've got a couple questions. The first one in the chat box, then I'm going to invite Hasina to come off mute. And that is, do you recommend any studies or reports on the true cost of turnover?
Do we recommend looking at
any studies or reports that that estimate the true cost of turnover?
Yeah, there's tons of these reports that are out there. You can probably Google them, or we can provide you with some of that information. There's reports overall about turnover, and the folks at Envision may have some of that in their report also, but we share that. We also have seen it by industry. Obviously it's gone up, the turnover has gone up, but again, the cost of turnover, we've been seeing this for a long time. And at the lower levels, when you're thinking about people leaving and the cost of recruiting and hiring, the loss of knowledge, at the lower levels, it's generally thought to be about 30-35%. As you get to the higher levels, a lot of experts are saying, it's far more than 100%.
And Larry, Hasina has her hand up.
Please.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for your presentation today. My question is just around when systems are in place that are trying to make things more equitable, you're looking at comp, and I just worry about when these systems actually perpetuate access barriers, and even the folks how you're deciding what is equitable when there's just known pay inequity. Like if you've got clients that are saying we're going to be shifting to less about everyone being paid fairly and kind of catching some of these standout people, well, how is that not going to just keep us in the same cycle of elitism, nepotism, paying folks who have the access already to get more access? Like where do we draw the line?
That's a fabulous question. And actually, if we don't address that, that's when things are perpetuated. We find with the nonprofits that we're working with and other ones that there are some people that are underpaid, but there's also a lot of them that are overpaid. quick case, and we're under contract with the local hospital to do their compensation, every year. Well, one of our guys came in one day and said, "Can you look at this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was showing me two people that were working at very low levels in the organization. At the time, it was like a $25,000 job. One of them was making 25, the other one was making 50. So I asked, that one that's making 50, when did that person start? Well, the person started in 1977 and been in the same position. And obviously the organization just kept throwing more and more money. So we have tools that we introduce that control that, that basically, instead of saying we're going to give everybody the same increase, that person's already making $10,000, $20,000 more. Let's cap that person and let's free up a little bit more money to address the people that are lower paid. Some of those oftentimes are women and minorities. And so again, part of the services that we offer, and not all of our clients ask for this, is within our compensation analysis, diversity analysis. And we take a look at how people are paid, again, not by their years of experience, but their level of proficiency. And we can identify where people should be within their range based on the level of proficiency. Are they entry level? Are they evolving? Are they fully proficient? Are they superstars? And specifically where people are paid too low, healthy organization look at how that they can correct that, especially if it's a female or minority, because then they're subject to some other associated risks. But the fundamental question when you have a compensation program, you all do, and you all know that compensation is your biggest cost, your biggest investment. The fundamental question is, am I going to manage it or am I not going to manage it? And the clients that come to us, over 1,000, well over 1,000, and it's mostly for compensation services, have made that decision. What we have is not really working. Help us to figure out how to manage it. And where there are these inequities, we help them look at that. And we also will model how much it's going to cost, if anything to speak of, to remedy those equities and get people where they need to be paid. So
can I ask just how diverse is your internal group that's making those decisions? And is that something that you guys also kind of?
We are, we were a female minority owned organization. So partner was an African-American male and my wife, white female. And then I came along and unfortunately the African-American male died. So, it wasn't like he quit the organization, but fortunately passed away. So we've been big proponents of diversity. I was the EEO officer for Nissan, and the conciliation agreement officer. I have a deep, deep background in diversity and equal opportunity. I've negotiated with the EEOC, so we have a lot of experience there. But we take this very seriously. Everything we do to make sure that organizations, to the extent that they can, are competitive with who they are competing with. And for the for-profits, more and more of them are saying, we don't want to just look at the for-profits. We're also competing. A lot of folks in the audience are in administration or HR or operations. You guys can go anywhere. And so we're being asked to also look at what's going on in the for-profit world. But no, we're deeply committed to this. And our clients that have asked us to do the diversity analysis are thrilled. They're very happy because it really helps them figure out where they are and what they need to do.
So Larry, we have one follow-up question that's pretty extensive. I'm just going to ask Jared to come off mic or off mute, I should say.
Thanks. The question I had is when you're looking across levels in an organization, at what point does a salary differential go from being ethical and fair, because there are different responsibility levels, different skills, specialized skills that you may need at one position versus another? And then at what point does that become no longer ethical? So, for example, the CEO may make more than the entry-level person. And where's that line between that differential is justifiable versus it's now inequitable and unethical?
We're passionate about what we do, but we're dispassionate about how we do this. So everything we do starts with a trend analysis. I'm going to give you a long answer, but hopefully this is going to help you because it's a great question. We talk about the trends. We come up with a compensation positioning philosophy. We come up with a set of objectives so everybody knows what this should look like when it's done. We clarify the roles, and then we go out to market. And the market is what the market is. You know, it's kind of like years ago when I was doing college recruiting. You know, all the engineers had a 4-year degree, but why were the petroleum engineers making more than the mechanicals and mechanical more than the civil? Because that's what the market says. So we look at the CEOs. When you're talking about a true CEO or executive director, that person is generally going to be the highest paid because that's what the market says in the scope of responsibilities. But within different levels, when you're talking about, let's say you have a bunch of managers that are at the same level, we're going to look at, you know, maybe an accounting manager may make more than, you know, a purchasing manager, you know. So we're going to look at what is the market telling us to get these people within a flexible range that makes sense. But then we're going to look at each person in terms of what did they bring to the party. And that's something that we created. We haven't seen anybody else create it. We call it range management guidelines, and our clients love it because it's the first time that they have a tool where you can really look at a group at any range based on where they are to the midpoint. What are they bringing to the party in terms of their experience, their education, their training, and more than that, what is their level of proficiency? And that helps us to figure out where they should be. Great question.
And Larry, one last question, then I think we should move forward, and that is Carrie Castaneda, please.
Hey, Carrie.
I'm just wondering if you've had experience with organizations trying to implement a living wage, the concept of a living wage. And then particularly we're an organization that has a lot of entry-level positions, you know, a lot of times individuals who this is their first job out of whatever. And those tend to be lower wages. So I'm just interested in if you've had that type of experience, particularly with the living wage.
We haven't had a lot of experience with living wage. There are some industries that are really focused on that, and we have done some of that work. But usually when we're working with an organization, we're looking at all levels. And so when we look at the entry level, you know, the hourly rates have been going up, you know. And so you can go to McDonald's, and I know last time I went to McDonald's, I don't even know what the person in the front was doing because she wouldn't take my order. I had to go over to the kiosk. So, but they're making like $17 an hour. So there is that upward pressure, and you know the hourly rates have been going up, and then the exempt threshold. If you're an exempt employee, you have to be paid at a certain level. So a lot of the work that we're doing is helping organizations to not only look at what the laws are telling us right now, but also what we're projecting and how they can deal with that, because a lot of them are having compression problems. You know, the person that's 3 levels above the lowest level right now is not making much more because they've raised the lowest level. And so we do a lot of that kind of analysis to help them level set, to figure out how to be in alignment with the laws, how to attract the right people, how to pay them properly, and also model if they have to make adjustments, what is that going to cost? So we have a lot of different reports that allow you as the client to be able to cut these reports all kinds of different ways. You want to look at females versus males, minorities versus non-minorities. You want to look at how people are paid within a certain band or a certain position. So you would have the benchmarks and all of that information and our guidelines to see what makes sense. Great questions. Should I go ahead, Dina? All right, so this dovetails real nicely with what you heard at Envision in terms of why somebody would leave an organization. I'm not going to ask you for a show of hands, but I would ask each of you, because I've tested this out of myself and every client, you know, if you think about why you've left an organization, why is that? And what we found is it's going to fall within one or more of these quadrants. Many of these were already, you know, talked about in the last presentation. The biggest reason why people leave typically is pay. And we've seen different surveys. Sometimes they say culture, but the reasons why people leave an organization are two extrinsic areas. We call them quadrants. Pay and benefits are extrinsic. Pay is usually given as a bigger reason, but also two intrinsic, organizational culture and also learning development. We started talking in the last presentation about career lines of progression and alternative career paths and those kinds of things. So the flip side of this is you want to try not to lose your best people, but you also have to look at what do you need to do to attract high quality talent. I think that there's too much focus on the cost of turnover, and there should be at least as much focus on what you're missing if you're not paying properly or having the right total rewards program addressing these to get better quality people. Because now more and more studies are coming out, and we're all over this, talking about how an exceptional performer can significantly outperform a standard performer, not a poor performer, but a standard performer. And in some areas, like you guys, your C-level positions, it could be it could be 9 times. It's hard to get your head around, not 9% better, but a great CEO versus a standard one, a great operation manager, a great software programmer. And so you want to make sure that your program, we try to get everything on one page where we can. This is everything on one page. That when you're looking at how to better attract and retain people, we work with organizations to let's take a look at all of this. And when we say pay, it's not just base pay, it's short-term incentive pay. And there are differences that came up in the last between senior executives and other folks in some organizations, where to be able to bring in a top level senior executive, you might need to offer a 457F plan or a split dollar plan or a 403B or something like that. So that's going to require a deeper conversation, but I think this is a good model for you guys to get your head around. Has anybody ever left a job because of something other than this? If it wasn't, a personal need for relocation or family situation, or this pretty much is right on? All right, I'm going to take that as an affirmative. All right, so these are the kinds of, we ask our clients for feedback, and they say that the engagements that we've been involved in have helped them to retain the best performers, helps them attract top talent, improves the DEI. Like I said, we're doing a lot of work in this area, more from a compensation standpoint, increasing employee engagement, which is, when it's almost at an all-time low, and improving organizational team and individual performance. And this is a lot of times where we start. So with that, I know you guys are probably more interested in hearing from Sandy than Norb or myself. Like I said, Sandy is just great. She has such a high level of intellectual curiosity. We had several conversations at first, and I could see the wheels turning, and you'll see how from the start of our conversation to where we got going, it was a more holistic, integrated type of approach. So Sandy, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks, Matt and Jen. My wheels are sort of spinning with all of the information that's come out of the Envision report. That's really helpful. And I'm making notes to try to make sure we've kind of hit all the high points here at the Peterson. I've only been with the organization for about 10 months, and my first full day at the Peterson was a board meeting. And our board had been bouncing around the idea for quite some time of implementing an employee incentive program. So that was something that we talked about on the first day that I was here. And fortunately, as sort of an outsider newcomer, I have no pride of ownership or defensiveness around any of the procedures that we had in place. So it was an opportunity for us to look at what an incentive plan would really look like for the Peterson, and what would we need to put in place to support that, to make sure that we had an objective, fair, equitable system, with the goal being really kind of twofold. One is the incentive program should be supporting the growth and the performance of the organization as a whole. And then it should be the system that we have in place to assist us in attracting and retaining our staff, and particularly, as Larry has said, those rock star staff, the high performers. So we started the process of seeking a consultant to work with, and we feel very fortunate to have found LTC Performance Strategies. They came highly recommended to us. We actually even reached out to a couple of other consultants who said, no, these are the folks that you want to work with. So it's been a great partnership. We ultimately kind of culled down the project to 3 main components. So competitive, internally equitable compensation program. So that's base compensation. We asked Larry and Norb and the team to look at our base compensation and to benchmark to make sure that we are in line. And I'll just to skip back, I think one of the slides that Larry presented had a title of being an employer of choice. And really that was our philosophy is how do we become an employer of choice? And there's so much involved in that, and it certainly extends beyond compensation. But what we'll look at here today specifically is some of the decisions that we've made around compensation. We needed to have a more progressive, forward-looking performance appraisal system than we had in place. We had kind of the old school report card, scale of 1 to 5, looking at past performance. And that was not where we wanted to go. We wanted something that would drive growth and development for our staff and would be much more forward-looking and talking about their not only just organizational work-related goals, but their personal goals. And that touches on a little bit of what the Envision report mentioned as well, giving people that opportunity to advance and what does that look like for them, and making sure that as employers, we're aware of what their personal goals are. And then ultimately, we developed with LTC this goal-based management incentive program that we are just rolling out for fiscal year 2022. Let me skip over there. So one of the I guess collateral material pieces that LTC presented to us that we have really embraced is this concept of a roadmap. So this is all of the things that are that we as an organization are focusing on right now, culled down to a single page. So it's our vision, mission, values, the organizational goals that we have developed. So obviously, if you were to look at this for, in all of its glory and with all of the details, there would be more information here, but there were 4 things that we focused on. What's our employee experience? What's the museum experience? So that's the experience that our guests have. Looking at growth for the organization, and then the financial budget. And then the supporting organizational goals or the drivers are really kind of the action steps that should all be feeding up into those 4 main organizational goals. So in most cases, those then become goals for some of our individual department heads or the department as a whole. They're the things that are moving us forward toward those organizational goals. This is an item that we will make available to all of our staff and particularly to our new hires. So we can share with them right out of the gate, what is the vision of the organization? What are the things that we value? And what are the goals that we're focusing on this year? I think it's a great way to get everybody up to speed quickly. And a lot of what we've talked about with LTC is how do we get everybody on the same page and moving in the same direction? And this is literally getting everybody on the same page. It's, it's a 1-page handout that summarizes where we're headed this year.
Yeah, I think you might want to mention something about the goals training too, because the idea was that most people have never been taught how to select goals, but maybe that might be helpful to the folks, Sandy.
Yeah, I think that's an important part, an important service that LTC provided to us. We've done numerous trainings with our staff in setting individual goals and department goals. And as Larry said, I think although it sounds pretty straightforward, it's not something that a lot of us probably have done in such a formalized way. And it was very important to us that we walk our staff through this training process of setting those organizational goals, because ultimately their incentives are going to be based on their successful completion of those goals. So they needed to understand what's important to the organization and how do your goals tie in to meeting those larger organizational goals. And then how do we make them measurable? That's a key element, right? Especially if we're talking about incentives being tied to them, we need to be able to determine were you successful in meeting those goals or not. And then what are the steps, kind of how do you break that down into micro manageable pieces that that will actually move you forward to making sure that you are able to achieve those goals in the time allotted?
Yeah, so I think it basically, if I recall correctly, Sandy, the organization had not communicated goals to everybody, but you ended up with 4 goals. There was a goal around each of these areas: employee experience, museum experience, growth, and budget. And then everybody was trained and then asked to come up with 3 goals. So this first group that you're piloting were 22 people, I think. So yeah, basically had 22 people setting 3 goals plus the 4 goals. So all of a sudden, going from no goals that were shared across the organization, now there are 66 goals between the 4 goals and the employee goals, and they're all in a document and they can be shared so everybody can be there to help one another out. So it's this concept of synergy to drive the organization forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's great. And I think once we compiled all of those goals, it was a process. It took us probably a couple of months from start to finish to work through that goal setting process. We pulled them all together, and we've talked a lot today about transparency. And part of our desire was to be transparent about what the goals were across the organization, across departments, because like many organizations, I think we find ourselves being kind of siloed by department, where one department doesn't necessarily know what the next department is working on. So sharing those organizational goals and individual goals throughout or among the participants was one of the steps that we took to being more transparent. And once we compiled them all into that single document to be shared with everyone, it really was kind of eye-opening in a way that even surprised those of us who had been working on the project from the beginning, how powerful it is to see all of the work that our staff intend to focus on and accomplish over the next few months. I mean, everything from developing procedures manuals for their departments to increasing revenue, to increasing the number of children that are served in our educational programs. I mean, really a variety of powerful steps toward the improvement of the organization. And I've mentioned to Larry before, I came from a background where we really valued being agile and flexible and responding quickly to opportunity. And by its very nature, that sometimes meant that we weren't very planful. We weren't always as strategic as we needed to be. And this process has really emphasized to me how important it is to take the time to sit down and develop those goals and to share them among the people who are going to be responsible for making sure they happen, and setting up a process to make sure we're monitoring them, we're staying on top of it. And it has greatly increased our effectiveness at communicating within the organization.
Great. Well, go forward because of time. I'll move to the next slide. So Sandy, you want to talk a little bit about this, just the results within the 5 months?
Yeah, so I think as Larry mentioned, one of the things that's been pleasantly surprising is how quickly we were able to move through implementing these various aspects that we asked LTC to help us with, the base compensation program, to create a transparent program that matches or exceeds benchmarks, the growth and performance system, where we transitioned from that traditional report card to a more forward-looking system. Our staff are really embracing that. It's something that we are rolling out to everyone right now and are receiving really great feedback on that. And then the incentive plan, which is replaced any sort of discretionary program that we had previously. It was really a very small number of our staff that were participating. And it was unclear how some of those discretionary bonuses were determined. Now it's a very defined process that's based on those assigned or established goals that the staff established for themselves with the assistance of their direct supervisors. A completely transparent process that our staff have wholeheartedly embraced.
Great, thanks, Sandy. So just I guess wrapping up. Well, I guess you could say something here about what you feel in terms of a return to the organization before I kind of wrap up.
Yeah, so there are a few ways to look at the return on investment. Certainly, a lot of what we've looked at has been not necessarily just a financial impact to the organization, but non-financial as well, and improving, the security of, for instance, I mentioned the number of staff that we have that are working on developing procedures manuals for their departments. Particularly in this era when we're all seeing turnover, and we're all certainly working to do what we can to lower those turnover levels. The reality is we will have staff that leave over time, and having our staff work on documenting their procedures for their department so that there is something in place to hand off to the next person really creates a sense of security and will greatly assist us in transitions when we do face those situations of turnover. But we have here on the top of the slide that what we're looking at as far as return on investment or the cost associated with this program is about 8% of the participant's salary. That actually breaks down to less than 1% of our overall operating budget. In return for that, we've identified about 5 times as much increase in revenue or cost savings based on those goals that our staff have developed. So the program, first and foremost, is paying for itself. Those incentives will be covered through increases in expansion of revenue generating programs, as well as some cost savings. And we've talked a lot today about compensation in general. Really what this comes down to for us is recognition of our staff's performance. And I think no matter the size of the budget of the organization or the flexibility that you might have in your spending, and I know there are organizations here that are very reliant on government funding, and I actually came from that environment as well, so I understand the limitations that you can sometimes have regarding compensation. But this is about recognition, and there are so many ways that you can recognize staff, and it doesn't have to be an incentive program. If that doesn't work within your organization, that's not something that you can fit within your budget. I would just encourage everyone to really have a focus on the ways that you can recognize your staff. For the Peterson, this program has been part of really a complete analysis of what we do and how we interact with our staff and what our corporate culture is and our benefits and just every touch point that we have with our staff and what we can do to make ourselves that employer of choice and become that environment that people really want to work at. We're a fun place to work at. We have really cool cars. But that won't keep people here, right? We've got to offer something more than just that. And recognition is something that we can all do. There are so many different ways that we can roll out programs to recognize our staff. And yes, compensation is important, but for many of us, it comes down to how valued you feel in the organization, and compensation is just a piece of that.
Thanks, Sandy. Did you get any feedback yet? There's been a lot of talk about educating boards and working with boards. Any feedback from your comp committee about this process the last 5 months that you want to share?
Yeah, so we have a compensation committee. We presented the entire plan to them within the last week or so. It's a pretty impressive group of folks who sit on our compensation committee, and they were wholeheartedly supportive of us moving in this direction. They actually were some of the folks who were pushing for the organization to implement this type of a plan. And they are very pleased with what we have rolled out.
Great, thank you. So as far as the applications to other nonprofits, you know, some of you may be thinking, we're not sure that this would work in our organization. We've done this kind of work with a large number of organizations and really just about every industry. And we're getting asked more and more by the nonprofits. You know, most of this work has been in the for-profit world, and it's been, you know, successful manufacturing and service and actuarial firms, and we've not seen it not work. And so what we've tried to just come up with is, you know, what does it take to make it work? And just want to wrap up and leave time for any other questions by saying, I think it's just a commitment. I think what we learned from Sandy is she came in, she realized that she had the ability and the respect of the top management, and she wanted to make a change, and they got behind it. So there was a commitment to creating a healthier, higher performing work culture, whether it was going to cost any money or not. So the commitment, having strong employee engagement with a healthy dose of team and personal accountability. One of my pet peeves is there's a lot of folks that tell us there's an entitlement mentality and there isn't much accountability. And we feel like part of building a healthy, high performance company, you have to have a healthy dose of accountability. When you ask people how they're doing, what's the most common response? I can tell you the most common response I get is busy. We're just so busy. Everybody's just so busy. And they're really focused on activity. And what we've been trying to do with our clients is move them from this busy activity orientation to an effective goals orientation, where after a while it's setting goals, sharing how the progress, and achieving those goals, and then setting new goals, and then building that into the infrastructure of the organization. We've also let people know through the training that this isn't all about the organization, that when we teach them this goal setting process, which is typically like an hour and a half type of module that they really like, that we want them to think about how this would apply to their personal life. And what's been a joy to my wife/partner and I when we've been invited back on campus is to have somebody come in and say, hey, oh, we remember you were the goal setting guys. And by the way, I never was a big proponent, but this helped me save my marriage, or helped us buy our first home, or it helped me quit smoking. So we try to let people know that not only are we interested in helping the organization to do better, but we're interested in you guys as individuals. And it's really fun to see how it's helped people in their personal lives. I think a willingness to become aware of and implement customized best practices. I think a lot of times we've become so inner focused on what we're doing day to day, year after year. And what we found is we have to stay on top of best practices and then find a way to appropriately customize those practices to our clients. And then lastly, patience. You know, like I said, when people ask us, is this going to work? We usually say, yeah, good results the first year, very good. Next year, great results the third year. And a lot of times they're getting great results shortly. But we also say you got to walk before you run. You know, you've been in it, you've had this organization for a long time. You're so used to doing things the same way. This is a change. And whenever you have a change, no matter how good it is, there's going to be some resistance. And if you're committed, you just have to push through that resistance. So there are probably other ones that I'm not thinking of, but we would call this the basic success factors of getting very good results here. So I want to open this up for any other questions. And
I'm actually going to ask pose the question to the group, and maybe Larry, I can ask you to stop sharing your slides and just if there are any questions for Matt, for Jen, for Sandy, Norb, and Larry, as we kind of take our kind of summation here. And thank you very much for your patience and grace this morning. I know we've run a little bit over, but I want to make sure that if there are any other questions or invitations for support or resources, that we get them on the table. Please, Woody.
I'm just curious, when it comes to the tracking of your metrics, that's going to require additional resources. So I'm wondering how you budget for those.
It's a good question, Sandy. You can answer from your standpoint, but I was going to say it really doesn't seem like it's been very hard to track the metrics. A lot of the metrics are around growth, and a lot of them are around financial performance, and that varies from organization to organization. It might be overall profit, could be net profit, could be gross margin percentage, but we haven't found it very difficult to measure the overall organizational performance. Some of the individual metrics, you know, some of our organizations are concerned about customer satisfaction or on-time delivery. Maybe that takes a little bit more work, but honestly, I can't think of where it's been very difficult to do that. And again, you have people that really want to make a difference. So they're happy to be able to show how what they're doing is moving the needle. But I want to get your opinion, Sandy. Does that look like that's difficult? Would be difficult for you guys?
Yeah, for the organizational goals that we established, for the most part, those were metrics that we are already tracking. They were already areas that were important for us. So things like the museum experience, we're using visitor surveys, set goals around what our visitor survey results will show. For the employee experience, we're looking at employee retention, voluntary retention or voluntary turnover. And then the other two really are financial goals. And we've been able to incorporate all of these goals into the payroll HR software that we use. So we have a tracking system that will allow us to keep track of employee comments regarding their progress as well as their supervisor progress.
Yeah, and
I would assume that you, in the development of your strategic plan, that somehow these things filter down to the more nuanced part of your objectives that you are having for your departments and individual people. So I'm curious as to how that processes work when you're looking at, you know, your board participation versus stakeholders in the organization.
Yes, our board, as I mentioned, our board really drove this process from the beginning. They just needed someone to kind of come in and put it all together on paper. And it ties very closely or really completely to the organization's strategic plan. So what was already developed. The goals that we're looking at are fiscal year goals. So the strategic plan is a little bit more broad and you know, has a longer time horizon than most of the goals that we're looking at, because we are looking at you know, an incentive that will cover the activity for the current year.
Hey, Woody, that's a great question. One of the things I wanted to emphasize, if you go back to that roadmap, is we really believe in keeping things simple. So we've actually worked with organizations that were 90 million, can you help us get to 100 million? And we jumped in and worked with them towards that purpose and asked for a copy of the strategic plan, which was like 35 pages, and came back the next day with a one-page roadmap challenging the board and leadership to find anything of significance from that 35-page strategic plan, which basically sat on a shelf It wasn't shared to the one-page plan that Sandy told you about. That's going to be shared with everybody and talked about every month, and then every quarter more formally.
Okay. So then my last question is, then how do you ensure that you have buy-in, from your constituents? How, I assume you have some type of metrics in place that's monitoring this on an ongoing basis. So how do you, I guess I want to know, how do you know when you get there?
Sandy, you want to look at it from a micro level? You're at the museum, and I'll piggyback on you.
Yeah, so we've developed a dashboard that we'll share with our staff on a monthly basis that highlights where we're at any moment in time in reading and reaching those goals. So it's a very simple kind of graphical presentation of where we're at on meeting those 4 organizational goals.
Again, great question, Woody. I would say that the vast majority of the constituents, the participants, buy in. They like it. They want to work for a winning organization. They don't want to be kept in the dark, but there is a change. And we all know that law of physics, for every action, there's an equal to or greater reaction. And you are going to have a small handful of people in an organization that are going to be resistant to change. And they're typically your lower level performers, and they've been kind of hiding without much accountability. You may find some of those folks just decide this isn't for me, but very few of those folks. I would say the vast majority get very engaged. They like to, again, feel like they're on a winning team. And the pudding, it's the results. Like I said, everyone that we've been involved in has had at least good results, some extremely good results in a short period of time. So I think the buy-in is generally very strong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any last comments before we take our leave? Matt, you just came off a mute. Any last words of advice for all of us?
I was just really hoping that somebody would have a question for me, but now I feel that nobody wants to talk to me over here. So Sean, Larry, no, I just, ultimately, this is also, truly all this is so important, and, our jobs are obviously really important, but I think the burnout level is also huge. And, we're all doing these Zoom meetings. We're all like, got galas now to plan, or maybe not because of COVID, all that good stuff. But just guys, remember that there is something about also taking time for yourself. And I know you're probably saying, but you don't understand how much work I have to do, or there's so much needs to happen, all those things, right? But, compensation is one thing, but you got to take care of yourselves and your staff. So I always bother boards to check in with their CEOs and vice versa, but just remember to take care of yourself. That's what I will tell you.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who's presented for the conversation today. I hope this was never presented as to pitch to consulting firms or to advocate that you had to eat the entire elephant as a meal, but rather hopefully you've heard some interesting strategies that may be in alignment with your core values as an organization and as an organizational leader, that you've got a few more, a few more tools in your toolkit as it relates to talent management in the nonprofit space. So thank you very much. I hope everybody will join me in my least favorite thing, which is the virtual applause for our speakers and presenters. And again, we'll be sharing the recording next week along with the slide decks. And I did pop the websites for our presenters in the chat box should you have questions after the fact. So thank you everyone for being here. A real pleasure. Jen?
And just one quick thing, if folks are going back through the chat, our fabulous teammate Sylvia Chin also dropped in a link to an actual highlight summary we did of the EMWR report back in December or January. So there's that piece as a teaser in addition to our slides will be coming.
Yep, and Jen, I'll definitely make sure it's in the post event so that everyone who had to move on with their agendas for today have access to that. So thanks everyone, a real pleasure.
Thank you.